All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Cadence Web webinar. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to keep trickling in. But in the meantime, I'd like to just do some quick intros and housekeeping. My name's Aubrey Bruckner. I'm the head of operations over at Cadence, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. This session is going to be camera off and mics off for participants. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, which is in the lower right hand of your screen. That said, if you do have burning questions and want to do them in a more discussion format, we are hosting an office hours in the upcoming weeks, so please keep an eye out for that event. And also, this is being recorded and we'll post it on YouTube in the upcoming days. So if you have to hop off of the call, no worries. We'll be able to post that along with the slides this week. And in the meantime, I want to kick off a poll to just kind of get started and understand where everyone's at. And the question is, how familiar are you with Cadence Web? So if you're a first user, welcome. We're really glad to have you here. And if you are a regular user or previous user of Cadence, thank you so much for your support. All right, it looks like we have one regular user. Thank you so much. All right. And I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter is Timothy Cassis. He is the head of AI at Cadence and is working really closely on this product. He's going to introduce kind of the essentials of getting started with Cadence Web and go over some use cases at the end of this webinar. The presentation is going to be about 30 minutes and we'll wrap up with about 20 minutes of Q&A, but we will be taking questions throughout the session, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. All right. Timothy?
Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you everyone for attending. As Aubrey said, really kind of the focus of this webinar is to get questions from you guys, and hopefully we'll have kind of the answers. But just to kind of give you a high-level overview of what Cadence Web is, we're going to probably present about 25 minutes worth of slides just to put everything into context. And really, this is all about kind of getting feedback from current users, from future users, and see how we can improve the platform for you all. This is a second webinar we've had. The first one was a few weeks ago. It was focused on our open source offering called Cloud Scientific Skills, which is currently being used by about 150,000 scientists worldwide. But this webinar specifically is focused on our hosted platform called Cadence Web, which is free to use, but it also has some kind of paid tiers for more complex analysis, which I'll give you an overview on in a few minutes. I do encourage you to follow us on X and LinkedIn and subscribe to YouTube. We post kind of updates when it comes to new features, promotions for some of the paid plans, etc. Just to kind of stay in the loop. And definitely visit our website for more information if you miss anything I said today. So I'm guessing a lot of the audience here right now attending is involved in some sort of research, whether it's scientific research, financial research, any kind of complex workflow you might be involved in at work or at school. Or generally kind of life research. You're researching a new home you want to buy or a new appliance you want to start using, and you're looking at risk factors, etc. So we all know research is actually very, very time intensive, and more so in today's world. What I mean by today's world, there's probably around tens of thousands of, if you're in the sciences or in academia, tens of thousands of papers being published a day. And this doesn't also include all the information out there on kind of blog posts, new findings that are presented through lectures, new data generated, open source data sets available for you to use, etc. So it really has become, I would say, prohibitive for any human being to really be efficient at this research process. Everything, we see researchers right now spending intense amounts of time on things like data wrangling, just kind of repetitive processes or analysis pipelines, and more so, in terms of presenting the results in the form of slides, papers, etc. I remember I did my PhD in bioengineering about 10 years ago now, and I used to spend a lot of my time just preparing, weekly slide updates, writing papers. It would take me 1 to 2 months to actually write a paper after I've created all the kind of results from my experiment. Creating figures took, days and days to create a nice figure. And databases right now, in terms of kind of information extraction, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of publicly available data sources out there. And it's no longer feasible for an individual to kind of go to every individual database, extract what they need, compile what they need, search, and kind of repeat. So what's happening is a lot of the time that researchers right now spend is no longer on generating kind of novel insights. It's mostly being spent on kind of these, let's call them secondary tasks that are not fundamental to the research process. So, we've seen a lot of these kind of AI, LLM-based platforms, think ChatGPT, Claude.ai, Grok.com, etc. They do have certain limitations, though, in terms of kind of helping you do what you want to do. So most of these platforms are what we call single-turn Q&A. So you basically ask it a question and gives you an answer. And that's pretty much it. They hallucinate, unfortunately, quite a bit. They make up results. They might make up citations. For example, I think most of you here have tried asking ChatGPT or Claude for a specific paper, let's say, or a resource. It comes up with some interesting results, and then when you actually go and validate that paper, you realize it was just kind of made up by the model. So it does still have a lot of limitations when it comes to critical tasks in kind of research and science and finance. They don't really execute any type of sophisticated code. They can maybe create a small plot, but nothing in terms of kind of high computationally demanding computational workflows in Python or R, or even running or training machine learning models. They have very limited access, if any, to databases. They can treat instrument files. So if you're using a mass spec or a sequencer or a microscope with kind of these proprietary image formats or instrument files, they just can't read it. And they usually produce either kind of plain text, or best case scenario, like they might give you an image as a reply. For example, if you're using Nano Banana 2 or ChatGPT image model, etc. So these AI assistants are actually really good for, I would say, just kind of normal question answering, kind of day-to-day tasks, but they don't solve any of the issues we mentioned here. They don't really help you execute on research. So where does Cadence fit in? So Cadence is a product that we essentially built over the past few months, and we released about 6 or 7 weeks ago. That's available for the public to use. It's pretty different from a traditional LLM. I think the main question we get from users, first-time users, is what's the difference between Cadence Web and ChatGPT or Claude AI, etc. And there's actually a lot of differences behind the scenes. So one is Cadence Web is able to do and execute on end-to-end research, and I'll touch on what that means in a few slides. All the results are grounded in actual data. So if you upload your own data, or if you point it to certain data sets in publicly available databases or proprietary databases, all the results are validated to actually be correct by looking at these data sources. So it's not going to hallucinate and fabricate data. Publication-ready outputs. So for those of you who have actually used Cadence Web, the majority of users are really kind of astounded by the quality of the output. So it can generate, I would say, nature quality papers, including figures and schematics and diagrams, pretty much all on its own. In most cases, they're after some validation by the scientists, they're ready to submit for publication. They're in the form of latex, so they can be edited in your favorite editor of choice, including Overleaf or OpenAI Prism. In most cases, you can actually just kind of submit your publication, and this is all based on your analysis, your data, etc. It's not just like some hallucinated paper that you're submitting. And then it can execute real complex analysis. So it can write workflows in Python or R that are hundreds of thousands of lines of code, or dozens and dozens of Python scripts, and execute them and iterate on them. So it can write them, improve them, run them, see what's wrong, improve what you're working on, and iterate on it. And what's really different here from kind of traditional LLMs as well is Cadence Web actually does the work for you. All you have to do is give it some oversight, essentially give it your objective, what you're trying to do, and interject if there are any instances where you need kind of a human in the loop. It's all optional though. And it just does the work for you. So you just have to give it guidance and review the output. And one important feature that really differentiates Cadence Web from a lot of other science-specific platforms, let's say Biomni or Cosmos, etc., is that it's very interdisciplinary. So it's not just science. It's not just biology and life sciences. It's all the sciences. It's really any type of work that needs analysis, from financial analysis to due diligence to machine learning, engineering, to physics and chemistry and biology and health and clinical research, etc. And I'll mention later why that's actually important. So over the past, I would say, year or so, we've seen the rise of these autonomous agents. So some of you have probably used Claude Code, or now a lot of people are using OpenClaw, etc. So what's really nice about autonomous agents is they are able to autonomously execute on tasks. And what we mean by that is you can give them a certain objective. They have access to tools and skills and capabilities, and they can essentially just execute in the background while you're sleeping and do the heavy lifting for you and the work for you. And in most cases, these autonomous agents are a lot faster than humans at doing certain tasks. Sometimes they're a bit slower, but generally speaking, they're a lot faster. And they have a kind of a multiplier component where they really increase your productivity, by 10x, 100x, depending on what you're trying to do. And not to mention, because these are kind of computational entities, you can parallelize them and scale them. So if you have 10 ideas you want to be testing at the same time, or 10 tasks you want to be executing on, you can actually run 10 agents at the same time. You don't have to do it sequentially like you would do as a human. And when it comes to Cadence Web is essentially an agentic system. So it's an autonomous agent, but can really do extremely complex workflows. It can write these workflows and execute on them. So it can go all the way from a hypothesis. Let's say if you're in the scientific domain, it will do the kind of data acquisition. If you don't have the data, it might look at publicly available sources. It would do literature search and literature review. It will do the analysis, so it can write its own code. It can execute. It can train models. It can use pre-trained models. It can fine-tune models. It does that statistical analysis, the visualization, and then it gives you the deliverables in the form of reports or figures or data sets if you ask for them, or kind of ready to submit preprint in the form of a LaTeX file or a PDF. And we get this question a lot. When it comes to science, like how do you close the experimental loop? So right now, Cadence Web is for anyone to use. It's not hooked up to any lab automation or robots, but it does have built-in functionality to actually provide protocols for you to run in some of the cloud labs like Emerald Cloud Lab or Ginkgo Cloud Lab, or of course your own labs. If you're a academic researcher or an industry researcher, it can generate experimental plans in order to fill in the gaps missing in the analysis and the workflow. You run these experiments, you feed the results back to Cadence, and you kind of iterate that way. So it really allows you to go all the way from hypothesis to validating your hypothesis. I'm going to stop here actually to see if there are any questions so far. And if not, we can move on. I think this is kind of the halfway point of my slide presentation. Okay, we've got a few raised hands. I do want to ask people to please put the questions in the Q&A. This way we can quickly answer them. Okay, so there was one raised hands. If you put the question in the Q&A, that'll be helpful. Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to questions. So, okay, we have a question. Okay, there's actually a question about finding the Q&A. So for those of you who have not used Google Meet yet, in the bottom right corner, there's kind of this 3x3 grid of dots. If you click there and then choose Q&A, and you'll see the Q&A panel, and you can type in your question to ask at any time during the webinar. Okay, thank you, by the way, for the person that posted that question. Okay, first question we have is, we have already a couple of engines for hypothesis generation. Can we connect them to Cadence? How? Yes, very good question. So there's actually a few ways where you can connect your own kind of tools or skills to Cadence. The most basic way is to just give it, we'll show you a demo later, but just attach it as a file to the prompt for Cadence and tell it to use this hypothesis generation engine that you described. The other way, if you want more of a kind of long-term approach, is Cadence Web is actually built on our open source tool set called Claude Scientific Skills, which is about 170 tailored skills specifically for heavy research tasks and science. Anything you contribute there, so if you add a specific skill, let's say your hypothesis generation engine, you add it as a skill to Claude Scientific Skills, overnight, it becomes available in Cadence Web. So if you're a Cadence Web user and you're like, okay, I really want to, I have the specific workflow that's I think is going to be helpful for everyone. It's open source. Let me contribute it to Claude Scientific Skills, and then you can start using it within Cadence Web. Okay. Let's move on. So another question we get is, what does Cadence Web actually have access to? This is a bit of a difficult question to answer. The reason for that is, I'll elaborate on it a bit, is Cadence is a very sophisticated multi-agentic system that can actually write its own code based on all knowledge out there. So what that basically means, it can write its own access to databases. It can write and use code and tools as need arises during the complex workflow. It can access any publicly available Python or R package. It can open and use any scientific format. So whether it's instrument files or kind of let's say .h5 files or .zeiss files or whatever you're using, it can actually access. And I'll try to answer these in a bit more detail in the kind of next few slides. So there are actually 3 modes in Cadence Web. And I know this sometimes causes confusion. So let me clarify what they are here. There's a mode that's fast and free. You can just use it. We don't know how long we're going to keep it free, but right now it's free. You don't even need a credit card. You can just log into Cadence Web and start using it. And then we have a standard and pro. Now, what's kind of the main difference between the 3? The main difference is that each one has different access to, let's call it, intelligence. And what that basically means is, for a fast model, for the fast mode, it still has access to the same skill sets and the same capabilities, but the type of output and results you get, I would say, are very good, but they're not research scientist level. So let's actually put this in terms of people. So with fast, you might get a quality output that looks like a senior undergrad doing research. With standard, you might get output quality that's equivalent to a fifth year PhD student doing research. In pro, you might get output quality that's equivalent to what a team of scientists or researchers can actually put together. So there's quite a large differences in terms of output. We do have one example. So Aubrey, the person hosting this webinar, actually recorded a short video, which is on YouTube. You can go to our YouTube channel that compares the three modes for the same task, just to kind of show you the differences. But usually what we recommend is if you have a very complex task, for example, end-to-end research, where you're going from a data set, you need to conduct analysis, execute code, you need to do a lot of kind of literature search and database lookups, etc. And you want like a ready to submit paper, you probably want to go with Pro. But if you have something that is equivalent to, let's say, 2 or 3 days of human work, then standard should be fine. But just to give you a better perspective on this, so Pro can essentially take what a team of scientists would need to execute on for maybe like 3-4 months, and condense it into a few hours. Standard is probably what a scientist might be able to do in a few days or a week and condense it into a few hours. Fast is what you would typically be able to do in like a day, and this condenses it into like a few minutes. So it's really up to you to figure out what you need.
Hey, Timothy, we're getting some good questions in the Q&A and chat, so I just wanted to take a pause here to address a couple of them. So we had one question regarding credit sharing and transfer. So I've been thinking about a missing feature. What if you guys allowed credit sharing and transfer among users? Can you comment on that?
Very good suggestion. Actually, as of today, we have introduced a new plan in Cadence. It's a team plan. It's only open right now in beta for specific companies we're working with, but we are hoping to open this up to everyone in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And what the team plan allows you to do is have a shared credit pool. So for example, if you're an academic lab or if you're a biotech company, you can just buy a credit pool, and every user in that organization or lab can consume from that credit pool.
Great. And we have another question from Victor regarding the output of Pro Mode. Is Pro Mode built on top of Gemini 3.1 Pro, or are there different models for different roles?
Yeah, let me put it this way. So Pro essentially runs the state-of-the-art models for every type of task it's involved in. So to give you an idea, for a lot of the research tasks, Pro uses Gemini 3.1 Pro. For a lot of the coding tasks, Pro uses Opus 4.6, and so forth. So the capabilities you get in Pro are really unmatched, even by frontier model companies, because what we do, we choose the best and kind of model the best third-party servers for a particular module in Cadence Web. So you're always getting the best out of the best. Standard, in most cases, that's also the same. We run essentially the state-of-the-art models. The difference between standard and pro is standard has a bit fewer kind of agents that are doing the validation and the polishing and like the search, etc. That's where you're kind of sacrificing some of the output quality. But in terms of models, they're state-of-the-art. Free, we rely on slightly kind of less capable models, just to kind of keep it free for you guys.
Great. And we have a ton of other great questions coming in through the chat and the Q&A, but we're going to hold off until the end on those. Thank you so much for your great questions.
Okay, so just moving on. So the reason I was saying that it's a bit hard to put a numeric value on certain things like number of databases, number of tools, etc., is that unlike some other platforms where they say, oh, this platform has access to 80 databases, or this platform has, access to these 600 tools, our platform is actually very open-ended in nature. So there are optimizations for around 250 databases that the platform can access. So these are basically, think every publicly available database that US users have the right to access. This includes scientific databases, things like KEGG and PubMed and PubChem, to financial databases, World Bank data, EDGAR, if you're interested in SEC filings, etc. Clinical databases like the clinicaltrials.gov, etc. So Cadence has optimizations for, I would say, around 40 or 50 databases where it's like very, very, very good at accessing them. Then it has optimizations for another set of probably around 220 databases, brings it to around 250, where it can still access them. It's just a bit slower because it's essentially writing code on the fly to access them, but it can still access them. And then really any publicly available database that you can access as a human, Cadence can actually access. So we have a bunch of ways of doing that behind the scenes that enable Cadence to access all these databases. And same goes for kind of tools and packages. Like, we don't actually provide Cadence with an explicit list of tools like some other platforms. We give it very high-level instructions for how to create tools and how to use Python packages. And it can essentially write and execute anything that's out there. So there's really kind of no limits to what it can do. We do have optimizations that come in the form of our Claude Scientific Skills for particular scientific packages that you can use, by the way, free in Claude Scientific Skills. But Cadence Web has an added layer where there's no such limits in terms of what it can actually access. So, I say here 500,000 packages. That's essentially the number of packages available in the package manager PyPy. So anything that you can manually install that's available, Cadence can actually install and use. And then in terms of data formats, same thing is true. So to kind of simplify this, it can read any type of file that has any associated computational package that can read it, whether it's in R or Python or some sort of like CLI or executable. So this includes all common scientific, formats, H5AD, FASTA, DICOM, Parquet, .h5, .arrow, document formats like PDF, HTML, DocX, LaTeX files, HTML files, etc., etc. So there's really kind of no limits to what you can upload to Cadence and have it utilize and use. And then in terms of deliverables, again, we don't make this kind of very clear on the app itself, but it has extremely powerful capabilities when it comes to outputs. So for example, if you ask it to generate a research paper, it will create a ready-to-submit manuscript along with accurate citations, all your data grounded in the text, your results. It can generate a graphical abstract. It can generate workflow diagrams. So think of it as, for example, biorender, but on steroids, essentially. And for those of you on that kind of more technical side, behind the scenes, we actually have a platform that we built on top of Nano Banana, now Nano Banana 2, where we essentially have these kind of agents that use Nano Banana to create very, very high quality scientific illustrations and schematics, which are grounded in actual science and facts. So they're not kind of hallucinated outputs that you might get if you just gave your input to, let's say, Gemini Nano Banana by itself. And obviously, you can generate figures and plots and various types of outputs in terms of data, as like Parquet or JSON, CSV, etc. So it's really kind of very open-ended and really powerful. And something I do want to highlight, actually, which I'm seeing a lot of kind of dedicated platforms out there, claiming they can do, which is presentations and slides. Do attempt to create some slides in Cadence, and I think you'll be very, very impressed by this kind of slide creation capability in there. Okay, and then in terms of use cases, we'd love to run another poll here just to see kind of where the audience is in terms of kind of their background and expertise. While we're doing that, though, just to give you an idea, so Cadence Web is a very general platform. Here I mentioned just a very small number of kind of potential areas you could be using it for, everything from genomics, drug discovery, engineering. This includes, mechanical, electrical, chemical engineering, algorithmic training, due diligence, legal work, pharma, really anything you can think of, you can actually use Cadence for. And we do try to put out kind of use cases out there on our website. So if you don't go to cadence.ai/use cases, you'll see some of them. But this is kind of a very, very small taste of what Cadence can actually do. So let's give everyone another maybe 10 seconds to answer the poll. Okay, we're getting quite a few answers. Would love some more answers just to get a better sense of the audience. I think we have 5 votes so far. Okay, so far it seems we have people in kind of technology and software, healthcare, life sciences, education, research, and we have one person in marketing and communications. Okay. Okay, so to someone says they can't see the poll. I think did we close it, Aubrey, already?
Yep, we just closed the poll, so sorry about that, but feel free to drop in the chat where your area of expertise is, so we can kind of bend our use cases when we explain in the next section about that. Thank you so much. And can we take a minute for a couple of questions here, because we have a little backlog. So I want to go back to, you were talking about the tools and packages that Cadence has access to, and we have a couple of questions related to that. So one, we have a question about how can the user understand what resources Cadence is accessing, so I can understand if it missed something important and direct it to specific information. For example, if we're looking at for certain patents, how do we know that Cadence has referenced them?
Yeah, very good question. So one thing we emphasize in Cadence is traceability. I'll show you a few kind of examples when we go to the kind of the demo, but Cadence keeps a complete log. Let's call it that. We don't actually call it log. There's different names depending on what it is, of everything that it accessed. So it keeps a record of the database entries, the papers that it accessed. It keeps a record of the thought process that it used to actually find these sources, and puts everything in what we call the session directory, which is the output directory. So you as a researcher can go back in there and see exactly what happened. You'll see an execution summary. You'll see the thought process. You'll see the sources. You'll see the outputs. You'll see the code that was written, the code that was executed, the results. So everything is there. Now we do get feedback sometimes that it's overwhelming. There's just a lot of stuff, but that's kind of by design. Is we want to give people kind of empower people to really understand what was done. We don't want this to be like a black box platform where you have no idea what actually was executed.
Yep, makes sense. And Renato is asking, what about the R ecosystem? There's a number of great statistical packages that are locked there.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, our support for R is not, I would say, priority one. R is a very capable language that's mostly used by bioinformaticians, and this is for us. It's a very small niche of potential kind of Cadence users. We do have, excuse me. So Cadence actually does have ability to write R, and to a limited extent also execute R. But generally speaking, we use Cadence to write R equivalent scripts in Python and execute those, because they're usually a lot more performant and they're compatible with a lot more interesting packages than what's available in R.
Great. And we have one more question regarding kind of the tooling and connections to Cadence from Gerard in the chat. He says, there is some overlap in skills identified between Cadence and Claude Code. Which skill takes priority, and should a skill be modified?
Yes. Could you perhaps clarify what I mean by skill in Claude Code? So Cadence is a separate platform from Claude Code, right? Or are you referring to Claude Scientific Skills?
We might come back to that one at the end in case there's not a response. Okay, one more before we move on. Okay, from Victor, he said, do we plan to add extensions, API, or MCP connections?
Yes, so MCPs are actually supported in Cadence Web. You can connect whatever MCP you're interested in. And we are on our roadmap, we will add the ability for people to bring in their own API keys. And what that basically means is, let's say you have access to a proprietary database that has an API key associated with it. You can actually provide that to Cadence Web so it can access that database. API key integration is actually coming to our Teams plan in the next kind of few weeks. And MCP integration is already there. You can start using it. We do actually have a YouTube tutorial on how to bring your own MCP. Please go to our YouTube channel and you can see how you can add your own MCP server.
Great. And we heard back from Gerard on the Claude skills question. He said he was looking at scientific skills.
Right. So let me kind of phrase it this way. So Claude Scientific Skills is a set of skills that you can give to any agent, whether it's Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, and they act essentially as a AI co-scientist. Now, under the hood, Cadence uses these skills for some of its capabilities, but also builds on them a lot more capabilities in terms of being able to orchestrate multiple skills at once. So there's no competition here, whether it's a kind of Claude Scientific skill or a Cadence skill, because it's more of a question of how good is Cadence Web at using those skills compared to, for example, Cursor or Claude Code using those skills. And through internal testing and a lot of optimizations, Cadence Web is actually a lot better at using those skills than Claude Code or Codex or Cursor. So it gives you a lot more kind of capability and functionality. Okay, so moving on. Again, use cases really kind of across the board. Anything that's heavy on the research side, Cadence Web can actually do. And then Cadence Web is currently being used by a lot of academic researchers. Most academic institutions in the US right now that are research heavy are using, or at least specific labs are using Cadence Web. A lot of industry users are also using Cadence Web. And the use cases, again, vary everything from, we've got some kind of hedge fund managers using it for due diligence, all the way to academic researchers using it for cancer research or obesity research, etc. So really, if you're a professional in science or engineering or finance or healthcare, Cadence Web really kind of fits a lot of the workflows that you're actually working with. Now, there was a question about, how do you kind of work with Cadence Web or provide extra capabilities, etc. So this actually brings me to this slide. So I'm really kind of inviting you here to do two things. So one is, we're actually looking for academic collaborators to work with us closely. And when I say closely, we provide the technical support, free credits, the compute, kind of the optimizations, everything you need to conduct your research. And really, what's in it for us here is we want to be able to validate the platform with kind of various research areas that we, internally as a company, we just don't have access to. So if you're an academic collaborator, you're interested working on a research blog or a preprint or just social media posts, or just give us kind of feedback surrounding kind of your research area, and you want to use Cadence Web, please reach out to me. We'd love to work with you. We'll have kind of our technical team assist you in using Cadence Web. We'll provide you everything you need. And the question of how do you kind of make certain capabilities available. This brings me to the second point here, which is build with us. So we're huge advocates of open source. A lot of the stuff that we work on, we do open source. If you have a specific workflow or capability in mind that you want to make available in Cadence Web for you or your team or your fellow researchers or just the general community, you can contribute it to Cloud Scientific Skills in our GitHub repo, and it automatically becomes available in Cadence Web. And if you have any questions about that, please reach out to me. My email is timothy.cassis@cadence.ai. Okay, so before we move to just showing you a quick demo of the platform and just answering questions about kind of the UI and kind of the user experience, I would love to take any kind of remaining questions before we move on, if there are any.
Yep, we had a couple of questions in the chat relating to data security and privacy. So first question is, I'm a noob when it comes to coding and AI agents, but I often worry about safety. I'm wondering what kind of data about its users does Cadence keep and for how long?
Yeah, so we have actually a terms of use and a data privacy policy on the website, and we take this very, very seriously because, keep in mind that users of Cadence Web are usually working with proprietary data. They're working with things that are very intellectually important, and it took a lot of time to actually arrive at those files. So from our side, we don't actually use your data for any sort of training. We don't sell it. We don't redistribute it. It's used by Cadence Web to do the analysis, and it's stored there just for you, so you can go back and access your session if you want to do further analysis. Just to be clear, we do not actually train our own AI models at Cadence. We just kind of build these orchestration systems that take state of the art and put it together. We don't fine-tune models on your data. We don't expose your data to other users or investors or anything like that. So anything you upload there is really private. Having said that, we do not encourage you to submit anything that's sensitive. For example, any sensitive health information, especially around people, or sensitive information about, for example, financial information that might include credit card numbers, etc. We do take every precaution to keep these things secure, but there's never guarantees in the cyber world.
And we had one other question from Renato in the Q&A. He said, is there a teacher mode to teach our workforce? We're in the business of creating more scientists and would love to have them study those logs and the decisions made. Interesting idea.
Very interesting idea, actually. So that is a really interesting use case. The way I would see this happening is, right now it can actually be done through the prompt. So you can give Cadence a prompt and say, I'm interested in this research task. Describe to me the entire workflow in a instructional language and output that as a instructional PDF, let's say for a class or a group of researchers, and it can do that. But we can definitely at some point take this even further, where we can have this kind of Cadence Web, let's call it Cadence Web instructor or Cadence Web teacher or something.
And we had one more question from Elchan at the very beginning of our webinar, who asks if there's any guidance on the website to write a prompt for better results from Cadence.
Yeah, so we actually do have a blog post that we wrote that tells you how to write a good prompt. But let me quickly summarize it in 30 seconds. So essentially, a good prompt for a platform like Cadence would need to include what your goal is. Like, what are you actually trying to do? Are you trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis? Are you trying to train a machine learning model? Are you trying to analyze a data set? You just have to be clear about what you're trying to accomplish. The other thing is make sure you specify your deliverables. What do you actually want out of this? Do you want a PDF report? Do you want slides? Do you want just a clean data set, let's say? Do you want a machine learning model? You need to be explicit about what the output is. So objective, output. That's really all you need. Now, there's kind of in the middle, if you have any specific kind of methodology or workflow in mind, let's say you're in a specific kind of niche area in science, and kind of your community, your circle uses a specific methodology. You can point it to that methodology, either explicitly describe it. You can attach it if you have it in a form of PDF or some other document. You can point it to a website where that exists, etc. So the more context you give it, the more it will execute on you kind of your desired objective.
Yep. And I will say one thing that I really like about the Cadence platform is that when your prompt does fall a little bit short, the system is going to ask you clarifying questions to prompt you for this information. So even if you don't remember how to write the optimal prompt, it's going to help guide you so that your output is exactly what you're looking for. All right. And I think that's all of our Q&A, so we can continue on to the demo now.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is quickly give you a walkthrough of our UI, because I know it's a bit overwhelming for kind of first-time users. So when you log in to Cadence Web, you'll see something like this. And for those of you who are users of Cadence Web, we made a quick UI change just overnight. So this might look new to you as well. There's a few things you need to keep in mind. So the way we designed this is we designed it to look like familiar chat platforms. Like if you've used ChatGPT or Grok or Claude AI, they look very similar. So you have kind of these projects on the left. You have your input text window in the middle, and then when you start a session, you'll see another panel on the right. So we purposely tried to make it as familiar as possible. Now, when you're first time when you're using Cadence Web, you might get something like this. This kind of gives you a quick tutorial about how to use Cadence Web with a high-level description of capabilities, etc. This is a bit outdated now. We're actually working on updating it. A lot of the stuff has changed, but the general guidance here kind of still works. So I'm going to kind of show you how to use it and then show you a few examples. So the typical workflow is, you add your prompt here in the text box. You want to upload any data that you have. This includes any context. So for example, let's say you're working on a specific scientific question and you have certain papers that you want to make sure they're incorporated in the analysis, or the methodology is in the form of a paper, or you have a data set that's proprietary to you, or a data set that you downloaded, whatever it is, you can upload here any type of file. So if you remember all the files that I mentioned, whether it's instrument files, it's data files, it's PDFs, docx, you can just upload and actually use. And if a data set is really large and publicly available, you can actually just post the URL to that data set, and Cadence will automatically download it from that URL for you. So once you put in the prompt, you upload your data. What you usually have to do is you have to select the effort level. So if you remember, I mentioned these effort levels. There's instant, which doesn't do any code execution. It basically just answers questions. Think of it as like ChatGPT or Gemini on its own. Fast, which I described in the talk earlier, standard, and pro. Now, keep in mind that every type of effort level is capped at a certain dollar amount. So what that basically means is if you're using pro, the maximum you will pay for that task is $29. It could be a lot cheaper depending on the complexity of the task, but the maximum you'll pay is $29. For standard, it's $9 maximum. For fast, right now, it's free. And I encourage you to kind of play around with it as much as possible while that's still the case. And obviously, there's kind of some example prompts that you can try here if you're interested, but I'm not going to go through this now. So let me kind of continue walking you through the platform. So the other important thing that you kind of have to keep an eye out on is the projects. That's another question we get. So in projects, you might be familiar with ChatGPT or Claude AI, where all the files or chats in a given project are actually accessible by a new chat in that project. Now, that's not the case for Cadence Web. Projects here are purely for organizing your chats and nothing else. For example, if I create a new chat in Webinar right now, it does not have access to these other chats. And the reason for that is it's almost kind of impossible for us to actually have these in context, like some of the other platforms that do it, because there's so much data in each of these sessions. I mean, to give you an example, this is one session which I'll quickly walk through, but it has a lot of files everywhere from figures to results to executed code to the actual outputs, etc. So all of this is very difficult to index and put into context in a new session. So we don't actually do that right now. So let's look at a few examples. I'm going to go through these from kind of maybe simplest to more complex. So this is one example, and what you'll see here is a prompt that we use. So this is actually an example I shot a short video on last week on our YouTube channel. It's a single prompt. I just told it to create a 10-slide deck on how to take care of watermelon peperomia. It's a type of plant that my fiance and I recently got in our apartment, and make sure to include very clear visualizations and make the formatting plant themed. And that's it. I give it a prompt. I get presented with some additional questions that it asks me. And then I answer these questions, and then it kind of executes on its own. And the end result is a slide deck, exactly what I asked for. So it has 10 slides. It has images that it generated. So none of these are downloaded from the internet. So they're all yours. They're kind of proprietary images to you because you're using, Cadence Web. It has an intro slide. It has kind of all the information for how to take care of the plant. It's plant themed, etc. And everything here is accurate, and it's grounded in actual facts that Cadence had looked up from various sources online and databases to actually give you this. So that's one example. And someone was asking about kind of traceability. So this is a simple example. There's not a lot of files here, but for example, you can look at the summary. It tells you exactly what was generated. It tells you kind of the validation checks it did for generating this. Progress, you can track how the system went through, how it went through kind of executing on this goal. And then data, kind of the data sources it used. In this case, there was no academic databases that it actually reached out to, so this is kind of empty here. But we'll look at a few other examples that are more kind of data heavy. Okay, another example here, I basically had attached an old paper I wrote during my PhD and asked it to generate a graphical abstract. And same thing, it asked me a few clarifying questions. And then the final result was essentially this. So it's a professional quality. Something like this would typically cost you $400, $500 if you were to outsource it to a graphic designer. This cost a few dollars to actually create in Cadence. And then it created two versions for me. There was this and this. And essentially what they're representing my paper. So these are all the results that were in my paper, including kind of the right physiology that's being described here. And then just a slightly more kind of complicated analysis. So I'm not going to read this prompt. It's slightly more complicated. So this is doing a kind of competitive landscape analysis of antibody drug conjugates that target HER2, et cetera, et cetera. I give it here some optional kind of databases to look up. I say, look at the FDA database, look at PubMed, Chembl, et cetera. You don't have to specify these. Usually the system figures it out. But here I was trying to be more explicit to show you like an actual use case you might be doing in industry, etc. And here what you end up with is a lot of files. So there's a lot of figures generated. There's all the intermediary results. Again, going back to traceability, everything is here. Everything that the system acquired, analyzed, all the Python code that it had to write to do the analysis, all the writing outputs, including all the references in a .bib file, the peer review it conducted, and finally, kind of the full report. So the full report is a 22-page report that includes scientifically accurate schematics, a table of contents. So there's an executive summary, scientific differentiation, there's a clinical landscape analysis, market analysis, strategic synthesis, etc. And think of these as essentially equivalent to like a McKinsey or BCG type of report. And this is the last example I'll show before we kind of take the last set of questions. Here, we gave it a data set from publicly available. Someone had published it on Hugging Face for basically predicting four different classes. I won't go into the details here because I know most of the audience is not in the genetics area. But essentially what it does is it created and trained its own machine learning model to do the task I specified. I gave it an objective, and it kind of went for it. And what I asked for here was a slide deck. And this is the kind of results slide deck. It describes to me the process it went through. It describes kind of the clinical challenge, describes the data set, the methodology it implemented and trained, the training performance, the loss curves, etc., and then kind of the final metric. So again, in terms of deliverables, you can really ask it anything in terms of slides, PDFs, LaTeX, HTML, really any type of format, even docx and PowerPoint slides, any type of format you usually use, you can ask Cadence Web to do. Okay, so let's take, we have about 4 more minutes. Let's take any remaining questions.
I think most of our questions have been answered in the chat and Q&A for now, unless anybody has some last-minute ones. And I've also just shared a couple of links to our website, LinkedIn, X, link to sign up for our newsletter, as well as join our Slack community. There's tons of ways to stay connected, however you like to stay connected. Strongly recommend subscribing to our newsletter. We send out updates on kind of what's new in the platform, if any new features or integrations have been added. So it's a really great resource. Oh, okay, we have one question from Victor. He's asking, can you please show where to access the history you mentioned of all actions and sources Cadence accessed?
Yes. So all the outputs we actually just dump into this session directory. So this here, for example, the README has an explanation of everything it did, including any assumptions it made, any databases it accessed, etc. The Python executables are usually in this workflow folder, and they're numbered by kind of the increasing. Well, they're numbered chronologically in terms of like when they were executed. So you can run this entire pipeline to reproduce the results from 0.1 to 0.8. A lot of the intermediary results are put into results. So these are before they're put into a deliverable. Logs has logs associated with whatever you're doing. So in this case, it's the log for the machine learning model. And then the data has usually the data sources that it used. For example, these are kind of my training files. And it dumps kind of a bunch of other things in there as well. But really, everything you need to understand what happened, what was executed, and to kind of re-execute or re-implement what Cadence did can be found here. And even you get kind of the Python packages that it installed in the environment to run all this. I hope that answers the question. And by the way, we are adding some more capabilities for traceability. Right now, we do this kind of data dump on people. And I know it's very hard for people to interpret what's happening. We're working on better kind of UI UX approaches to communicate that information to users. So yeah, do subscribe to our newsletter to kind of stay up to date there.
Great. And I think that's it for question and answers, and we're just about at time right now, so let's wrap it up. Thanks again, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Timothy, for the great presentation. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.